Hello, I'm Philip Hanson, and today we're going to have a little look at some things that we can do to make sure that our waterfed poles are properly maintained and last as long as possible. Now, as we know, waterfed poles can be quite expensive. They can range anything from under £100 to over £1,000, so it's worth making sure that they last as long as they possibly can. And the things that we can do to maintain our poles are not particularly complicated or time-consuming, simple procedures which will just help us to get the best out of them. Some of those are just simply a matter of keeping certain key parts of the pole clean. And we'll start off with that. And of course, the part which is likely to get most dirty is the brush head. So let's have a look at that first of all. Could do with a bit of a clean on the brush head. As with most monofilament brushes, the bristles themselves don't really get all that dirty because the bristles are a single strand of nylon, so the water tends to flow through them and take any dirt with them. But nevertheless, the backs of the brushes, especially of all types, tend to get a bit cobwebby, as is the case with this one. Now, what I've got here is a bucket full of pure water, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply plunge this brush head into the pure water, like this. Give it a good swill around. If this brush was really dirty, you could get your hands in there and just agitate the bristles a little bit, try and get the dirt out of them and the grit. And that's really all you need to do. You could leave that soaking in there for an hour or two, or overnight even if you wanted to, and then take it out. And that's all you really need to do to clean these brush heads. They're pretty self-cleaning. Okay, so that's dealt with the brush head itself, the part which actually does the cleaning. Now, aside from that, one of the main causes for pole wear, premature pole wear that is for dirt and grit to get in amongst these sections, the pole sections, and down inside the clamps. Now, what happens when that takes place is that the grit gets inside the clamps and stays there, and every time you extend and lower the section, it acts as an abrasive against the section, and that's what causes it to wear prematurely. So it's worth keeping and doing everything you can to keep the sections as clean as possible. Now, of course, in normal work, you can't keep it completely clean because that's what we're doing with the pole. We're taking dirt off, so there's always going to be some dirt there. But there are some little techniques that you can employ just to try and keep that amount of dirt to a minimum. Part of the pole which has a hard life and which gets quite dirty is the internal pole hose itself. Of course, this is dragged around all over the ground. It's dragged through sand, through soil, through anything that happens to be on the ground, which is fine. It's quite tough. It won't fail that way. But the problem is, of course, when you extend the pole, most of the pole hose gets drawn up inside the sections of the pole, and that's where you can get a problem, because sometimes the dirt and the grit that's on the pole hose can then get transferred onto the sections and into the clamps and so on. So the way to prevent that from happening, as much as possible at least, is to, after every use, some would say, you might find that a little bit cumbersome, certainly every time you put the pole in the van, or at the end of every day, is to just clean the pole hose itself. And it doesn't need to be an elaborate clean. All you need to do is take your microfiber cloth, or any other cloth for that matter, and just start with the pole fully collapsed, start at the bottom end, and just run the pole hose through the microfiber cloth all the way till the end. And that way any dirt that's built up on the pole hose will get cleaned off and it won't get onto the sections. So the next thing is to actually try and get the dirt off the sections themselves. Now, you don't have to do this very often. Once a week is probably enough. And the thing to do is just simply extend the pole as far as it goes, and then take your microfiber cloth, which should be a little bit damp. And often you get one of these microfiber cloths supplied with poles for this very purpose, just to keep them clean. And all you need to do, doesn't need to take very long, you just clean the pole section with the microfiber cloth. Dead easy. You don't need to extend the pole all sections at the same time. You can do that section, that's fine. Close that one down. and then move on to the next one, and just make sure that these sections are all nice and clean with this lightly damp microfiber cloth. Something else that you can do, which will help to maintain these clamps as long as possible, is to just take a little bit of care when you're lowering the pole. Something to avoid, which can damage the pole as well as your fingers, is to let the pole fall under its own weight when contracting it and hit the other clamp. Now what I mean by that is if you've got the pole extended, and this is particularly true of these newer type of poles that are smoother, the action is much easier, they glide up and down almost, but there's less resistance there, so that when you open the clamp, what can happen if you're not careful, you're not paying attention, is that it falls down and it smacks down. Now I only extended that a few feet, but if you've got the pole extended all the way out, then that impact is quite harsh. Now, a good reason not to do that is because it's really easy to get your fingers trapped between those two clamps. Or even, what's more likely, is that web of skin between your forefinger and thumb. That is what can get trapped in there, and I've done it in the past. I'm sure many people watching this have done it, and it really does hurt. You can get blood blisters, you hurt your fingers, you trap your hand. It really isn't nice. So there's, on its own, that's a good enough reason not to do that. But as if you needed another one, here's another good reason. When you do that, if you allow the pole to fall under its own weight and smack into the next section, that impact puts a huge amount of strain on the clamp above, because all of the pole's weight is suddenly, bang, pushing against that clamp, all in one big impact. And what can happen then is it can crack the clamp, it can break the clamp, but more likely what can happen is the clamp can just detach from the section because they are glued on, and then you've got a problem. Worse still, you'll probably find that damage like that caused by just allowing the pole to fall under its own weight probably isn't covered under warranty. So you'll have to be gluing that on yourself. That's not particularly difficult, in fairness. You get a tube of Ardolite, two-part adhesive, and you can glue them back on fairly easily. But nevertheless, you don't want to be doing that, especially if you're in the middle of a job and you need to be able to use the pole. The way to avoid that is just to be a little bit more careful when you're lowering the pole. You should always lower the pole as a two-handed technique anyway, because if it's extended, you don't really have much control with one hand. There's a chance it could fall over, especially if it's windy. So you should use two hands anyway. But the way to do it is to hold on to the handle section with one hand and bit by bit lower the extended section down into the lower section. And that way you'll avoid that harsh impact at the bottom end. Something else that you can do for your clamps is just to remember that they are moving parts, and it pays to keep those moving parts lubricated. And the best thing for that is 3-in-1 oil, which is just light lubricating oil, which you can buy in any hardware store, or anything like it. You know, a similar product to this will do just as well. But the reason I like this so much is because the dispenser that this comes in allows you to apply a very small amount, drops in fact at a time, and that really is all you need for these clamps. So again, this is a once a week thing. You just need to open the clamp up, take your 3-in-1 or similar oil, and just dab it, one drop, onto the cylindrical clamp nut there. Perfect. And that will keep the lever moving nice and smoothly, so that it doesn't get clogged up. The thing to look at is really the hose connector, the piece at the other end of the internal pole hose that connects to your water supply. Now these again have a hard life, they're dragged all over the ground, but they're tough. They're usually made of some type of metal, brass or aluminium, and they're able to withstand the tough life which they have to endure. But something that you should be careful of is not to stand on it. Now, you're unlikely to break it by standing on it, that isn't the problem, but the problem that you might have is that dirt off your shoe, soil or sand or grit could go into the hose connector, into the water stream. If it gets in there and then you connect it up to the water supply, the stream of water is going to push that dirt all along the hose, the pole hose, and right up to the end of the brush. Now, most of the time, if you do that, there's a good chance it's just going to blow through the jets and it's going to be fine. But occasionally, especially if you have a little bit of grit, it can block the pole hose jets, the brush jets. So that's a common problem sometimes, as you'll be pulling away and suddenly you'll notice that one of the jets isn't working, or one is working more than the other. And more often than not, that's the cause. It's because a little bit of dirt has got into the water stream and is blocking the jets. So be careful not to stand on it. There are some hints and tips really just to help you get the most out of your poles, to help them last as long as possible. They're the hard working end of window cleaning your water-fed pole. It's important that you get the most out of it as you possibly can. The pole I've been demonstrating everything on, by the way, is a Grafter 24 from Ionic, which I have reviewed. In fact, you can see more about that on my blog, which is professionalwindowcleaner.co.uk, and also you'll see more information on how to and professional hints and tips there too.